Hi, Misha here, and this video is a little bit different than usual. We're going to talk about the import of pistols, how it's changed, and potential changes, dare I say even threats to it, going forward in 2022. Kind of talk about the rise of the, hard to say, but we'll say less conventional pistols, and why this interesting category could be coming to an end, why it first existed, and kind of why it may be ending. So we're going to get into a little bit of legalese, but not too deep. And also keep in mind, I'm limited by the time in which I'm recording this, so what I say now may no longer be valid by the fall or even summer. So keep that in mind, the publication date. And also, if you'd like to help support the channel, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd really like to help out, go over and check out the page on Patreon. So, we began with two guns on the table that are distinctly not pistols. And kind of from that pre-ban era, as we call it. This is a Springfield SAR. It's actually a SAR 3 over stamp 8. And this is a South Korean Daewoo. Well, I was going to say K1A1, but this is actually a Max 1. Same gun, different name. Imported both in the 80s. But let's go back in time a little bit to discuss the whole idea of pistols. Before 1938, we had no FFL system, and before 1934, the difference between pistols and rifles was kind of immaterial. In 1934, we had the National Firearms Act, NFA, established. Yes, it set up a registry for machine guns, guns that if you pull the trigger, they fire more than one bullet. And it also established what we know today as SBRs and SBSs, short-barreled rifles and short-barreled pistols. Interestingly, this whole thing is an artifact of parts removed from the NFA. Now, the short-barrel shotgun, the SBS, is kind of understandable in the sense of why in the 1930s legislators and even citizens were sometimes concerned about them. Criminals were often used short-barreled guns, and these weren't factory-built guns. These were just sawed-off kind of ghetto shotguns. Now, shotguns had their own category. Rifles and pistols. They were established to be rifle had a barrel over 18 inches, shoulder stock, so on and so forth. A pistol had a barrel under 18 inches. Although this was not codified, it could have a barrel of 20 inches. Mostly they were concerned about, minimal length for rifles, if that makes sense. And more importantly, a pistol could not have a shoulder stock. Retractable, foldable, fixed, otherwise. And the reason that a SBR exists and is a, $200 stamp, initially they wanted all handguns to be treated like machine guns. So you needed a stamp, it needed to be on a registry, so on and so forth. This was removed from the NFA before it was passed, but it remained in the sense that you couldn't turn a rifle into a pistol, thus circumventing the whole thing. That's why it was originally there. So SBRs remained, that whole thing remained, even though it's a little bit of a leftover of earlier concerns that were pulled out of the legislation. Nevertheless, yeah, if you wanted to have a rifle with a shorter barrel, you had to pay a stamp, pay a tax, get a stamp, becomes an SBR. Moving forward, let's get to 1968. The Gun Control Act changed things up. It addressed importation quite a bit and established the whole sporting clause, guns, and it mostly looked at pistols, what they called Saturday Night Specials. This is why guns after this can come in with thumb rest grips, target sights, yada yada. A pistol had to be a certain size, minimum size, and a certain minimum weight, and have other features. Again, they're not really caring about maximum size and weight. As far as rifles being imported, it didn't really do a whole lot, although it technically banned things like grenade launchers. That's about it. That's why guns like these have adjustable stocks. They take standard magazines and even can have flash hiders and threaded barrels. Also, 1968 established import markings. Now, to be fair, before that, guns had to be initially stamped country of origin, say Germany, and then this was slightly expanded in the 1920s, 30s to made in Germany. But after 1968, you had to have a lot more information. You had to have the importer's name and address, country of origin, caliber, yada, yada, yada. And again, I'm kind of blowing through all this, but that gives you an idea. Moving into the 80s, we get to 1986. Now, the good thing in 86, they actually went back and repealed parts of the 1968 Gun Control Act. A lot of these were interfering with bringing over surplus guns and a few other things. That was a good thing. And it also addressed ammunition, making it easier to direct purchase ammo. The bad thing, of course, they closed the machine gun registry. And then after that, you could no longer get a machine gun post-May of 1986. Pre-Mays could be transferred, of course, but post, you only have what they call post-dealer samples. But we're not here to talk about machine guns. Moving from that, you can still file for an SBR stamp or an SBS stamp, or any other weapon stamp for that matter, which was $5 instead of $200. But then we get to March of 1989. At this time, the president, George H. Bush, newly made president, signed an executive order meant to be tough on crime and gang activity because things like Chinese AKs were seen to be used by gangbangers. But what it did is it effectively banned so-called assault rifles from importation. Like I said, prior to this, the 1968 Gun Control Act had very little to say aside from import marks and making sure they were not machine guns and couldn't readily be converted, yada yada. But the 1989 executive order banned many guns by name from importation, and it also banned a lot of features. Adjustable, collapsible stocks were considered a no-no. Pistol grips were considered a no-no. Flash hiders were considered a no-no. Bayonet lugs. One thing it did not address were standard capacity mag wells, so that was okay. So after this time, you cannot get rifles with a lot of features. But it did not discuss handguns, pistols, that kind of thing. And that actually is very relevant. And I brought this gun out for a very specific purpose too, because I want to talk about in the 80s, you didn't really have a lot of pistol imports that were military style. You had a few things like the Uzi pistol, and very late on you had the HK SP-89, but for the most part, they were all coming in as rifles. And this Daewoo is a good example. The original gun would have had a 10, 11-inch barrel, and today we would import this as a pistol, of course. It would seem logical, so just no stock, and the original barrel with removable muzzle device. Back then, their solution, and this is one of the better ones, they extended the barrel out far enough, and then they permanently attached the muzzle device, the flash hider. This is a K1A1 flash hider, giving it an overall length of 16 inches. Now earlier I said the NFA had a minimum length of 18. Well, in the 70s, this was reduced down to 16 inches for rifles. Interestingly, it stayed 18 inches minimum for shotguns. Now the overall length still needed to be 26 inches But most importantly, that was with stock deployed, not in. So it did not talk about pistols, and at this point, no one much is thinking of pistols. And this would continue into the 90s for a few reasons. Sorry that I really don't have many examples of 90s era post-ban imports in original configuration to show you, but here's one, a Hungarian SA-85M. Guns like this with a thumbhole stock, this is how they got around the butt stock and pistol grip limitations, and no bayonet lug and a non-threaded barrel. These started to come in the 90s, again still as rifles. Now in 1994 we had the federal assault weapons ban, which is part of the crime bill. Now we hate the assault weapons ban, I'm sure, but keep in mind it did give funding for prisons, it did give funding to hire new law enforcement, it gave funding to help prevent sex crimes and other things. So it was kind of one of those famous omnibus bills where you take something to get something. Either way, what's important for today in that, because mostly it was all domestic, but it did put limitations on pistols. It limited their size and, more importantly, weight. Now, the assault weapons ban also limited magazine capacity to 10 rounds or less if the mag was made after September of 1994. But it didn't really care about the magazine well itself. This is why if you look at a ban era AR pistol, they look rather skeletonized and goofy. But beginning in 97, but signed into law in 1998, there was a second executive order, this time under Bill Clinton, that really did away with this. The double stack magwell, able to take high capacity magazines, i.e. over 10 rounds, for imports. After 98, imports had to come in only able to accept sporter type magazines. This was added to the already made list of features that were no-nos. So this is why you start to see guns like the Wasser come in with a stripped down magwell, if it were. This also killed a lot of imports, including our Daewoo's. Just a lot of companies didn't know how or even care to adapt the magwell. It was just a bridge too far. Also, they added about 56 more guns by name to the ban list, including from Steyr, the USR. So this is where we were moving into the 21st century. We had the assault weapons ban, and we had the 89 import ban, which had been expanded. And both 89 and 98 were based on the 1968 Gun Control Act and the whole sporting purposes clause. So at this time, there's really no way to import a pistol with fun features, even though 89 didn't deal with them. But one good thing, the assault weapons ban had a sunset clause, and it was not renewed in 2004. So as we moved into October of that year, it was lifted. Although the 89 ban remained, the assault weapons ban was gone. And this was important for pistol imports because now we no longer have a maximum size and weight requirement, and since 89 didn't really mention them, it's kind of a free-for-all with not a whole lot of rules and regs, certainly not compared to what rifles are having to suffer through. So let's look at what we got and how we got there. Importers seeing more and more restrictions on rifles, and with the sunset of the assault weapons ban, and with one more thing. In 2005, there was a new change to importation of parts kits. Prior to this time, you could import an entire firearm, less the receiver, which made building quite straightforward. But after this point, barrels could no longer be brought over with kits, meaning not only did you need another component, a rather expensive one, you had to install all the hardware for the barrel, and it made head spacing more difficult. All of these factors combined to make them turn more and more to pistols as they realized there just weren't that many restrictions. And one of the first to come in was not this gun, but it was similar to it. This is, of course, the Mini Brill that just started coming in last year. But one of the earliest pistols of this type would have been something like the Romanian Draco, followed a couple years later by the Serbian M92. These AK pistols had barrels initially about 12 inches and 10 inches respectively, although as time would go on they would get shorter. At the time what they did, they sent them over. They had threaded barrels, but they had permanently affixed, either spot welded or pinned, like on this, muzzle devices. But because they were pistols, they were able to have a standard magwell. They could have a pistol grip in the rear, and they were not allowed to have a buttstock. Now, funnily enough, this one has a sling bar in the back. Early on, importers like Century were so uncertain what they could and couldn't do, they didn't even want to put a sling swivel on the back. They were very hesitant to, because they didn't know what they could get away with. The thing to remember with imports, rifle or pistol, you have to submit a sample to the ATF for approval. And they can accept, approve it, or reject it, deny it, essentially at will. So you have no rights when it comes to imports. It's whatever they, let you go with the grace of the government, if you will. Here's another one. This is my Zenith MP5K, Z5K. You started to see pistols like this made. Again, this is the short barrel, non-threaded. And things like this would have sling loops. But these are some of the earlier styles of pistol imports we saw. Of course, this is in 9mm. And this is in 5.56, as it were. Although your early Dracos were either mostly 7.62x39. Although there was a version known as the Champion 2007 that was in 5.56, and even a 22 version. So they started to really experiment with what they could do, and then some importers started to kind of challenge things, push their luck, if they will. Pushing imports forward, in 2014 we received the first of the POF MP5s. And these were important because they had the full-length barrel. They came in with a 3-lug adapter as well as the HEPA 28 threads. Of course, they had a standard magwell. And they had a standard end cap that could readily be replaced with a shoulder stock. And also they had a push pin lower. Previously, the HK imports had a shelf lower and no paddle. This was something HK offered in the 80s and ATF accepted, approved, and that's pretty much what everyone had been going with, both foreign and domestic. Well, POF decided, hey, let's submit a design, well, not POF, but the importer, Firearms, with a push pin type lower and paddle mag release, still making changes so it's semi-automatic only, and see if we can get approval. And the first time they did. And then after the fact, ATF was kind of asked why they approved it. And their answer was pretty straightforward, because no one had really asked before. It's also, I think I should say, that in the 70s and 80s, the ATF was a little more concerned with the conversion to machine gun than they seem to be today. They don't quite seem as hung up over that. So imports were getting quite interesting, and the ATF started approving things that in the past they probably would not have. Mine here, of course, I've put an A2 stock on, and I've affixed a fake can to make it into a carbine. When I mentioned in the beginning about the NFA and all that, it is perfectly legal as a private citizen to convert a pistol into a rifle. It's not legal to do the reverse, though. You can't turn a rifle into a pistol. And the reason is pretty straightforward. There are more restrictions on pistols in America than there are rifles. Pistols, you have to be 21, only 18 for rifles. With pistols, there's multiple handgun permits, and each state treats it differently. But you can take one of these and make it into a carbine, or any of the others we've talked about. But it needs a barrel of 16 inches and overall length of at least 26 inches. So that was one way they were being pushed forward. And up here is another. Here we have the SIG SG751P SOCOM imported by JDI and Imports. And this is a current 2022. And this is kind of the culmination of something that started a decade earlier. The first importer of Swiss guns in the modern era was M+M out of Colorado gun sales, essentially. They were the first to bring in the 5.53. Had originally a 10-inch barrel, then they had an authentic 8.9-inch, but their run would be cut short. San Imports, Dave Wagner, JDI would enter the scene around 2016 and would bring over some 5.51s, 5.53s, and eventually 5.50s, PE90s, and 7.51s, because they could. The rules in place from 1968 and onward had minimum size and length requirements, but not maximum. So even though this is not light, about 10 pounds, it was approved. This has a 16-inch barrel. There's also a version with a 20-inch barrel, and of course the PE90 type has a 21-inch barrel, taking advantage of the way the law is written. Perfectly legal because, yeah. And of course Dave had to submit these, including the caliber of 7.62 NATO, and they were approved. They have a end plate on the back, and of course are semi-automatic only, but otherwise are more or less completely full-featured compared to their military counterparts, taking standard magazines, even coming with a quad rail, a gas regulator, full-length barrel. And this is pretty much the culmination of the pistol importation, really pushing it seemingly as far as the ATF and the government are willing to go. And that pretty much gets us to modern day, although we do need to backtrack to 2012 to talk about another advent that really made these pistols worthwhile. Of course, you could always convert them to SBRs or make them into carbines like up here. But what if you want to keep it as a pistol, the barrel's under 16 inches, and you don't want a SBR? Well, up until 10 years ago, you didn't really have any options. But then one appeared and became very popular. I'm talking, of course, about the advent of the stabilizing arm brace. First appearing in 2012, it was made to help people shoot pistols one-handed, single arm, more reliably, accurately, and frankly safely. And yes, it was initially developed for disabled veterans or disabled anyones. It was initially approved in 2013, and there was a bunch of back and forth. In 2014, the ATF said shouldering it didn't matter. In 2015, they kind of came back saying shouldering mattered. In 2017, they again reversed it, although more privately with SB, saying it didn't matter, they overstepped. And now we're kind of in a weird period. But actually, all of this back and forth and reversal is good for us. In the beginning, pistols imports did not come with brace adapters. Here's my VZ61 and Makarov. But companies started making adapters like you see on this here. Here's the HK-SP5, also showing that after the success of MKE and POFs, even HK got on the game. And you could always easily install a brace adapter. The first ones were pretty clunky and ugly looking, and really only for AR tubes, but soon specific adapters that could even fold or collapse were made for guns. Here's another one. Here's the Zastava M85. While imported without an adapter, it has one on the back here for an SBA3. This is the adjustable style, of course. This even comes with an angled foregrip, which, while a vertical foregrip is not legal on a pistol, an angle grip, because you can't get your finger around it, is legal. Yeah, it's goofy. Also, at this point, they're selling them with removable flash hiders or muzzle brakes. Still able to take standard capacity magazines. The arm brace took pistols from novelties that were, frankly, pretty unpleasant to shoot at the range. Either if they were big, they were too heavy, or if they were lightweight, like the VZ here, they were just not fun. They like to kind of twist in your hand, and yeah. But with the advent of the brace, you had a fun and safe way to shoot them. And depending on the brace, they can actually look quite attractive too, like on this HK. And that's been a major industry in America since. Low estimate, 3 million have been sold. Highest estimate, 14 million. So I've even seen one crazy estimate of 40 million sold, but that seems a bit much. This has really changed the game. Now this video is not on the brace. There has been talk 2021 into 2022 about the ATF yet again reversing their stance on braces, even submitting for approval. It has not been approved yet, a weird point system. But personally, I think all these reversals back and forth, even if they try to do it, it would not stand up in court. To that, I kind of point to things like the G Series FAL. If something is sold and purchased in good faith, the government should not be allowed to make it illegal post facto, not after 10 plus years and millions of owners. But again, story for another day. But it could be one of those things we do have to take to court for rights. But the fact that so many people have bought and are enjoying these, and the fact that they were made for disabled people, yeah, imagine the disability activist groups there. So we'll see. But that really made the whole pistol thing much more viable. And again, at first you had to buy the adapter here and put it on your gun, but after a while importers even became even more brave. We now have pretty much full featured imports with barrels whatever length they need to be. They have threading, they can have bayonet lugs, and we started to see them even coming in with threads for AR tubes. Here's the Bren 2 MS. The end piece comes standard with the tube adapter. Compare that to the 805 Bren pistol that you actually had to get an adapter for. Of course, this is a piece with it. Of course, here we also have the mini jack pistol with the machined receiver. It has the tube threads built into the back of the receiver. Of course, this comes with a cap on it, but it's extremely easy to remove once you own it, making it ready for any adapter or brace you might want. Again, comes with threads and still able to take standard AK mags, and the Bren here takes standard AR-15 mags. Pretty neat. So this shows you that a brace is just a standard feature now, not something optional, making these guns practical and, again, fun. So things were going pretty well pre-pandemic and even into the pandemic. But, all good things. And it seems like every time something is going well, someone has to rain on the parade. And that's kind of where we've been since late summer of 2021, moving into spring of 2022. And now cool pistol imports may not be here for much longer, although they could be. As with anything involving the government and the ATF and importation, it's complicated. To end, I put an IWI Galil Ace on the table because they, more than almost any other major company, have really taken advantage and market opportunity, really profited in a good way by the pistol import from the Galil Ace to the Uzi Pro. And they've made not just a brace, but a unique folding brace that, in my opinion, looks quite good and matches up very well. I really like the Uzi Pro pistol with brace and the Ace pistol with a brace. They just look really well. And of course, with the Gen 2, we even get 13-inch versions now. They've gone a long way with it. Of course, in the USA, plenty of domestic companies have used braces. SIG, of course, and others. B&T and so on and so forth. These have been very popular and very successful. And that's the problem. The braces kind of flew under the radar for the first couple of years, but are now well known by politicians and the public. And pistol imports of this style, I don't really know a name for them. I don't want to call them assault pistols. But, they're not an MSR. They're not a modern sporting rifle. They're really just pistols. They just happen to be big. These have become increasingly popular between 2005 and 2022. And the lack of regulation that brought them in on pistols is also finally known by the government. I could get into exactly how they became aware of these, really, but it doesn't matter now. They're aware. Have to admit, the ATF tech branch was pretty cool for a long time, approving a lot of really neat guns, especially, of course, for me personally, guns out of Switzerland. Not just the SIGs, but also the Berger and Thomad, the B&T guns. And it's amazing we finally see HKs again, and not just, neutered ones, but full-featured MP5s. That's something I don't think we ever expected to see. And alternatively, too, we see some automatic sporting versions of current military guns, like originally the 805 Bren, and then the Bren 2. I really do feel fortunate, especially for that mini Baril. That's something we wanted forever, and we got it, amazingly. We've been very fortunate, even some milled pistols out of Bulgaria. I could go on and on. But they're on the radar now. And there's a big push to regulate the crap out of these. And yet again, the ATF turns to its favorite methodology, the points system. They are proposing to set up a points system to regulate what can come in. For example, they want to have a maximum allowed weight. And of course, it's ridiculously low, like under 3 pounds. They want to have a maximum allowed length, which again is very small. On top of that, they want to regulate things like caliber. They want to restrict pistol imports to a pistol caliber. What is that? No one knows. You might argue that 7.62 NATO is not a pistol caliber. Why not? But then what about 223? That's considered an intermediate caliber. Or is it just 9mm? Who knows? It's very vague. They're even taking exception to things like iron sights or a forearm, a handguard. This is all still in the proposal stage. Nothing has happened as of recording this video. But according to Dave Wagner and others, it's in the works. They've drafted not legislation, but rules, and they plan to put them in place. We'll see. I know it's getting a little bit like the boy cried wolf now, because it's been said it was going to happen right after Biden got elected, then next June, and then this June, whatever. But just because it's been predicted doesn't mean it won't happen. Now, guns that are already in the country are safe. They're not talking about making these illegal. What they're saying is they will no longer grant import permits. That's why we do see the 751 and 308, 7.62 NATO. This was approved years ago and is still approved. However, notice when Dave asked to import a version at 6.5 Creedmoor, that was not approved. And they kind of strung him along for several months, not denying it, but not approving it, which is a tactic they love to do. And then finally said no. And they told him, look, the answer is always going to be no. And they can do that. Again, this isn't law. This is regulation for imports. And they can deny importation for any reason, or even really no reason at all. It helps if a company, like say IWI, is good with the government. They definitely play favorites. That's why FN has been able to do a lot of stuff over the years. But regardless, yeah. So for a time, stuff that's coming in may be allowed to come in and no new items. But even that, once permits run out, because they all have either a maximum number of units that can come in or a time period, there's no like import blank, approval that's forever, no matter how many and how long of time. So eventually those all run out. We actually saw the same thing with the barrel ban in 2005. Even though the barrel ban was applied to kits then, you still saw kits coming in from some areas through 2007, 2008, because the import permits had already been given. So it would be a thing where it's allowed to time out. But once that's done, it's effectively they're adding to the 1968 Gun Control Act, FISA, the 1989, 1998. But here's the thing that's even more worrying. At least in 89 and 98, an elected official, the president, signed those pieces of executive orders. And in 1968, that legislation was passed by Congress. Now we have a situation where the ATF itself is creating and essentially implementing regulation without any government oversight from any elected officials. And this actually dates back to 2017, 2018, when they banned bump stocks, slide fire stocks. And we saw it just recently with FRT trigger systems. I'm sorry, but FRT, I can't help but hear fart in my head. That's actually how my speech says it. That's another thing they're kind of getting up in arms about: echo triggers, binary triggers, all that. So they certainly seem on the warpath. And again, this has been ongoing since 2017, 2018 with the Las Vegas shootings and all of that. So this isn't new, but bureaucracy takes time. So that's where we're at. If they do approve the new system for approving imports, none of these will be able to come in, because the maximums are just too little to let anything come in at all. And hopefully this won't happen, but it's possible it could happen, and it's something to be aware of. And that kind of gets me to something I've said for years and will continue to say. With imports, they're never forever. They're always temporary. It's always a blip on the radar. One way or another, they always stop coming. It could be the foreign factory shuts down. It could be the foreign government decides no, it no longer wants to export. It could be U.S. import regulations, or maybe just the U.S. importer, the business goes out of business. It could be lots of things, but there's so many steps for getting guns like these into the USA that sooner or later they stop coming. And then, of course, after that, then many people want them, and we see a situation like with the Sega SGLs. Bananas. Now I'm talking about pistols. Rifles are less in danger because rifles are already highly restrictive. They come in sporterized with low cap mags, no evil features. Of course, in the USA, companies can remanufacture them using a certain number of US parts. They're not as in danger. They could always add to the restrictions, but right now they seem to be focusing on pistols and to some extent arm braces. Really, to endanger rifles, you'd almost need another assault weapons ban to be federal. And at least when it comes to domestic stuff, we have some recourse to go to court over it. But when it comes to imports, we can't. There's no protection. There's no right to imported goods. So if they're effectively blocked, that's it, folks. And so that's why I wanted to talk about and do this video, because I love these types of guns. It's really very interesting to see what foreign companies are doing and foreign technologies and foreign manufacturing. Nothing against domestic stuff here. American ARs are great. Some of the stuff that SIG USA, like the MPX and MCX, is interesting. But it's nice to have options. And variety is the spice of life, and imports give us that kind of variety. And frankly, it's what I've made my business on. The truth is, if imports no longer come in, it will really put a major impact on my business, because that's what I do. Boutique type guns, interesting collectible types. There's no money to be made in AR-15s. There's too many of them out there. But if that happens, I'll have to just reevaluate, and there we go. But it is something very important to me, and again, I tried to give an overview in some detail without going too much in depth, so I did leave some things out and gloss over other things, just trying to give you some perspective here. If you'd like to hear more about what Dave has said about these, you can check out our last couple of interviews with him. He directly talks about the future of importations in those. One of them was quite recent, back in March, so that gives you that notion. No one knows the future, folks. And we'll have to just deal with what comes our way, frankly, the best we can. As always, I encourage the gun community to be united, not to have a lot of infighting, and to just stand up respectfully and firmly for our rights. I don't encourage any kind of violence or aggression. That gets nowhere. But at the same time, know what you're doing and know that we're behaving within the law. These guns are not being imported on the gray market. They're not loophole guns. These are literally approved, each and every one of them, by the ATF. And if there was any kind of ambiguity about the legality, CZ, IWI, SIG, and HK would not be doing it. The fact that these major companies are doing it tells you perfectly legal. And it should remain so because much enjoyment is made out of these. It promotes American business. And these are not the kinds of guns that are used in crimes. These are not the kind of Saturday night specials that the 1968 Gun Control Act hates so much. These are guns for gun shooters, hobbyists, match shooters, target shooters, collectors, historians, basically legitimate guns. They have both a sporting and a historical purpose. So we're absolutely behaving correctly, and I think we need to keep sight of that. But I'm publishing this now. The rules, everything could change tomorrow. I don't know, but it seemed a video worth making. With that, I greatly appreciate you hanging out with me and listening. If you could, like, share, and subscribe. And like I said at the beginning, if you'd like to help support the channel during these interesting times in 2022, please check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha. Get you very soon next time.